The rain came in sheets that morning, May 27, 1968, turning Norfolk's Pier 22 into a gray blur of water and waiting. Allie Boogerman dressed her children in their Sunday best despite the storm. She'd pressed her daughter's dress twice, straightened her son's ties, and now they sat in the family car as the nor'easter rocked it on its springs. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the rain, but Allie kept watching the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, waiting for that familiar black silhouette to emerge from the storm clouds. Her husband, machinist mate first class James K. Boogerman, had been gone for 3 months. 3 months of classified missions, sporadic letters, and nights wondering if every knock at the door might be a chaplain in dress blues. But today, that would end. The Navy had announced it on Friday. USS Scorpion would arrive at 1300 hours Eastern. It was now 1340. 8 years earlier, the Scorpion had been the pride of American submarine engineering. Launched December 19, 1959, at Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, she represented everything America had learned about nuclear warfare beneath the waves. Her teardrop hull stretched 251 feet 8 inches, specifically designed to slice through the depths at speeds that would have seemed like science fiction just a decade before. The Westinghouse S5W reactor in her belly could generate 15,000 shaft horsepower, driving her single screw to push 3,513 tons of steel through the water at 33 knots submerged, faster underwater than most submarines could travel on the surface. She was the third of 6 skipjack-class boats, each one costing $40 million and carrying the hopes of a nation locked in a Cold War that had turned the ocean depths into chessboards. Her 6 torpedo tubes could launch Mark 37s, Mark 14s, even the Mark 45 Astor nuclear torpedoes that could vaporize an entire enemy battlegroup with a single shot. She was rated for depths of 700 feet, though her crew knew she could go deeper. Every submarine had margins built into the specifications, margins that might save lives or might tempt commanders to push just a little further. Elizabeth Morrison had christened her with champagne, watching the hull slide into the Thames River while remembering her father, Lieutenant Commander Maximilian Schmidt. He'd commanded the first USS Scorpion SS-278, which vanished without a trace in the Yellow Sea in January 1944. No distress signal, no debris. Just silence where 90 men had been. The Navy liked to reuse names of lost ships. They said it honored the fallen. But for the families, it felt like tempting fate. By 1968, the new Scorpion was showing her age in ways that mattered. She'd missed her subsafe certification, the extensive safety overhaul mandated after USS Thresher's loss in 1963. Budget constraints, operational demands, Vietnam pulling resources in every direction. Her last overhaul had been the cheapest in Navy history. $3.2 million, with $2.3 million going just to refuel the reactor, less than $1 million to maintain everything else that kept 99 men alive beneath the surface. The crew called her scrap iron when the officers weren't listening. They'd jury-rigged repairs to keep her running, nursed chronic hydraulic problems that could send the boat into an uncontrolled corkscrew dive. Her refrigeration units leaked Freon so badly she had to beg for refills at every port. But she kept sailing, kept diving, kept completing missions that nobody talked about when they came home. Commander Francis Slattery had taken command in October 1967, young at 37, but solid, trained on the Nautilus herself. He'd written to headquarters that March, warning that the hull was in a very poor state of preservation, that delaying repairs another year could seriously jeopardize the Scorpion's material readiness. The warning went unheeded. Now Allie Boogerman waited in the rain, not knowing her husband's submarine had been silent for 5 days. February 15, 1968. The Scorpion slipped her moorings at Norfolk and headed east into the Atlantic winter, bound for the Mediterranean on a deployment she was never supposed to make. USS Seawolf should have been steaming toward Gibraltar that morning. But 2 weeks earlier, she'd collided with another vessel in Boston Harbor, tearing open her hull like a tin can. The Sixth Fleet needed a submarine in the Mediterranean. Soviet naval activity had tripled since the Six-Day War, and the new Echo-class nuclear boats were prowling waters that America had controlled since 1945. Someone had to fill the gap. The Scorpion got the call. Her orders were standard Cold War shadow work: monitor Soviet submarine movements, photograph new hull designs, record acoustic signatures, maintain what the Navy called indications and warning, military speak for knowing where the enemy was before the shooting started. But the real mission, the one never written in official logs, was psychological. Every Soviet captain needed to know American submarines were out there, invisible, recording every turn of their screws. By the time Scorpion passed through the Strait of Gibraltar on March 10th, she had 109 outstanding work orders. The hydraulic systems controlling her stern planes failed intermittently, sending the boat into sudden dives that left coffee cups shattered and men bruised. A trash disposal unit valve showed signs of metal fatigue, the kind of mundane failure that could flood a compartment in seconds at depth. Most concerning were the battery ventilation systems, critical for preventing hydrogen buildup during charging cycles. Machinist mate David Burton Stone wrote to his wife from Augusta Bay, Sicily, describing repairs that would have sent other submarines to dry dock. "We're fixing her as we go," he explained, his handwriting careful on submarine stationery. A pump bearing went out yesterday. 75% of the SSNs and 100% of the SSBNs would have gone to the shipyard. We fixed it in 3 days. The Mediterranean that spring was a chessboard of surveillance. Soviet surface groups centered on the helicopter carrier Moskva operated openly while their submarines played deeper games. The Scorpion tracked an Echo II-class boat for 6 days off Cyprus, staying close enough to photograph her hull numbers through the periscope, but never revealing her own position. Commander Slattery's reports, coded and transmitted in short bursts to avoid detection, painted a picture of increasing Soviet confidence. On May 16th, 2 personnel transfers changed everything. Interior Communications electrician Joseph Underwood had been coughing up blood. Tuberculosis fears meant immediate evacuation. And sonar technician Bill Elrod received word his wife had lost their baby during premature labor. Slattery, who'd lost his own infant son 8 years before, didn't hesitate. Both men would leave the boat at Rota, Spain. Just before midnight, Scorpion surfaced outside Rota's breakwater. A harbor tug came alongside in the darkness. The crew gathered mail for the last time, letters to wives, mothers, children. Stone wrote about the broken air conditioning compressor they couldn't fix. Hope the weather doesn't get too warm in the next few months. Radio man Daniel Petty, who'd fought for a year to transfer off Scorpion, had finally escaped to USS Skipjack weeks earlier. He'd told anyone who'd listen that the boat was a disaster waiting to happen. The 2 sailors climbed the wet ladder to the tug's deck. The mailbag followed. Then Scorpion's fairwater doors clanged shut, the hull vents opened, and she slid beneath the black water. Her next mission was classified even from most of her crew: shadow the ballistic missile submarine USS John C. Calhoun out of Rota, drawing off the 2 November-class Soviet boats waiting to track her. For 2 days, Scorpion played maritime shell games with the Soviet submarines. Then new orders. Proceed to the Azores area. Investigate a Soviet naval exercise, including an Echo-2 submarine, a Kotlan-class destroyer, and an auxiliary vessel. Maintain electronic silence. Gather intelligence. Return to Norfolk. At 2300 hours on May 21st, Scorpion broke radio silence for the last time. They were ordinary men who'd volunteered for extraordinary isolation. Fathers, husbands, sons, 87 souls from places like Oregon farmland and Brooklyn tenements, now sealed together in a steel tube beneath the Atlantic. Chief Motor Machinist's mate. Jesse De Silva kept a photo of his 3 daughters taped above his bunk, their faces smiling from a California beach he hadn't seen in 4 months. He'd joined submarines because the pay was better. Hazard pay, submarine pay, nuclear pay. It all added up to college funds and a house with a yard. But lying in his rack at night, listening to the reactors hum through the bulkheads, he wondered if his girls would even recognize him when he got home. Radio man 3rd class Mike Hannon's best friend was aboard. Steward's mate, 1st class Joe Cross, who'd taught him poker during long mid-watches and shared cigarettes on the deck during their last surface transit. Cross had a laugh that could fill the entire crew's mess, the kind of warmth that made a steel prison feel human. He'd extended his enlistment 6 months before, planning to save enough for a restaurant when he got out. "Real food," he'd joke, stirring the Navy's industrial coffee. "Not this recycled diesel fuel." The younger sailors wrote different letters home. Seaman Larry Haskins, 19 years old from Ohio, tried to explain to his mother what it felt like to dive, how the boat would tilt forward, the hull would groan, and his ears would pop as the air pressure changed, how they'd go weeks without seeing the sun, marking time by watch rotations and meals that all tasted vaguely of hydraulic fluid. He didn't tell her about the nightmares where the hull crushed like a beer can, or how sometimes he'd wake up gasping, certain he was drowning. Torpedo man 1st class Walter Bishop had been through worse. A veteran of 3 war patrols on diesel boats in World War II, he knew what real depth charging felt like, when the explosions came so close that light bulbs shattered and men bit through their tongues. This Cold War cat-and-mouse was nothing compared to running the gauntlet of Japanese destroyers off Okinawa. But something about Scorpion bothered him. Maybe it was the constant mechanical failures, or maybe it was just that he was older now, 43, with grandchildren he'd never met. He'd put in for shore duty 3 times, 3 times denied. Electronics technician 1st class Richard Curtis wrote poetry in off hours, filling notebooks with observations about life underwater. "We breathe each other's air," one line read, "share each other's dreams, carry each other's fears in the recycled atmosphere." He'd noticed how conversations changed the deeper they went. Voices got quieter below 400 feet, as if the ocean's weight pressed down on words themselves. The officers carried different burdens. Lieutenant Commander David Lloyd, the executive officer, walked every compartment twice a day, checking on men and machinery with equal attention. He knew whose wives were pregnant, whose parents were sick, who was struggling with debt or divorce. In his stateroom, he kept a list of every man's hometown, updating it when new sailors reported aboard. If the worst happened, he'd told himself, someone should know where to send the telegrams. Commander Slattery himself rarely slept more than 4 hours at a time. At 37, he was younger than some of his chief petty officers, carrying the weight of command on shoulders that still ached from college football injuries. He'd write orders in the margins of technical manuals, calculating battery charge rates against distance to Gibraltar, torpedo loads against Soviet submarine movements. His wife Barbara was back in Norfolk with their 3 children, probably explaining again why Daddy missed another birthday. In their last mail drop at Rota, many wrote what they didn't know would be final letters. Stone mentioned the crew's mood was improving under the new leadership. Bishop told his wife he'd be home soon. Cross promised his mother he'd visit that summer. They had 6 days left to live. May 22, 1968. 1820 hours, Greenwich Mean Time. 400 nautical miles southwest of the Azores, the ocean was keeping a secret at 11 to 100 feet. The hydroacoustic sensors at naval facilities in Argentina, Newfoundland, and the Canary Islands all recorded the same sequence. 15 sharp acoustic events over 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Not the rolling thunder of an undersea earthquake, not the steady rhythm of whale song. These were mechanical sounds, metal tearing, bulkheads collapsing, the acoustic signature of violent compression. At Norfolk Naval Station, radio operator Second Class Mike Hannon was monitoring routine traffic when he noticed Scorpion hadn't made her scheduled check-in. She'd been cleared from radio silence after her surveillance mission, ordered to report position and estimated arrival. But the frequencies stayed quiet. By 2,000 hours, multiple stations were calling Brandywine, Scorpion's radio call sign. The electromagnetic spectrum remained empty where her voice should have been. Nobody wanted to say the word overdue. Submarines went silent for legitimate reasons. Atmospheric conditions could kill radio propagation. Equipment failed. Sometimes boats ran quiet to avoid Soviet surveillance. Admiral Bernard Clary, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, had lost submarines before, temporarily. They always surfaced eventually, always had good explanations. But something about Scorpion's silence felt different. The families gathering at Pier 22 5 days later didn't know that senior officers had been trading encrypted messages since May 23rd. They didn't know that the nuclear emergency team had been quietly activated, that search sectors had already been plotted, that the Navy's deepest secret, the SOSUS underwater listening network, had captured sounds that could only mean one thing. Captain James Bella stood on the submarine tender USS Orion's bridge, watching the rain sweep across Hampton Roads. As acting Squadron 6 commander, he'd been checking his watch every 5 minutes since noon. Scorpion was now 90 minutes overdue, not unheard of, but troubling. The nor'easter would have forced her to reduce speed on the surface, but she should have radioed her delay. At 12:40, Bella made the call. Scorpion is overdue. Initiate submiss procedures. The word spread through the chain of command like electricity. Within an hour, President Johnson was informed. By 1800, CBS Evening News led with the story. The nuclear submarine USS Scorpion, with 99 men aboard, is missing in the Atlantic. The search began immediately. 55 ships and 35 aircraft converged on Scorpion's last known position. The USS Pargo, another nuclear submarine, dove deep and listened for any sound of hull tapping, emergency beacons, anything. Destroyers ran search patterns that would have covered 10,000 square miles of ocean. P-3 Orions dropped sonobuoys in precise grids, their crews staring at oscilloscopes until their eyes burned. But the searchers were looking in the wrong place. Scorpion's last reported position had been a lie, not deliberate, but a function of her secret mission. She'd been 400 miles from where everyone thought, investigating that Soviet naval group, maintaining radio silence as ordered. The crew had no way to know their actual position would doom initial rescue efforts. Dr. John Craven, director of the Navy's Deep Submergent Systems Project, knew they were searching blind. He'd helped locate the sunken nuclear submarine Thresher 5 years earlier using acoustic analysis and probability mathematics. Within hours of Scorpion being declared missing, he'd requested all SOSUS recordings from May 18th through May 23rd. What he found chilled him. The acoustic signature was unmistakable, an initial sharp transient at 1820. Then nothing for 22 minutes, then a massive bubble pulse with a frequency of 4.46 hertz, the sound of a pressure hull imploding at depth. The smaller sounds that followed were compartments collapsing in sequence, like firecrackers in a steel drum. The math was ruthless. Sound traveled at 4,120 feet per second through seawater. Triangulating from multiple SOSUS stations, accounting for temperature gradients and salinity, Craven plotted Scorpion's grave, approximately 32°5 north, 33°9 west. She was beneath 2 miles of black water, far below any possible rescue depth. June 10, 1968. The research vessel USNS Mizar arrived at Craven's coordinates, her crew preparing for what everyone knew was no longer a rescue mission. The Mizar wasn't built for comfort. She was a converted cargo vessel, her hold filled with winches, cables, and the most sophisticated deep ocean search equipment in the world. The same steel sled that found Thresher's wreckage 5 years earlier sat on her deck. 400 pounds of cameras and lights designed to survive pressures that would crush a human body in milliseconds. For 4 months, they mowed the ocean floor like an underwater lawnmower, running precise search patterns in a 12 by 12 mile grid. Every day, the sled descended at dawn, dragging 30 feet above the bottom, its 35mm camera firing every 30 seconds. Every evening, they'd winch it up, develop the film in the ship's darkroom, and study thousands of frames of empty seafloor, rippled sand, occasional rock outcroppings, the skeleton of a whale that had sunk decades before. The crew developed a brutal routine. 4 hours on, 8 hours off, punctuated by North Atlantic storms that could snap cables and send the million-dollar sled to the bottom forever. They ate standing up in the galley, slept in shifts on damp bunks, forgot what their families looked like. Chief Scientist Chester "Buck" Buchanan pushed them harder each day, knowing that back in Norfolk, 99 families were waiting for answers. The false alarms were the worst. On July 20th, they found debris that looked like hull plating. The entire ship held its breath as they repositioned for better images. It turned out to be a shipping container probably blown off a freighter years ago. August brought 3 more false contacts: a sunken fishing vessel, aircraft wreckage from World War II, something that might have been a submarine but turned out to be a natural rock formation that happened to look cylindrical. By October, morale was cracking. 4 months at sea, 12-hour shifts, nothing to show for it. Some crew members were talking about requesting transfers. The Navy was considering calling off the search, declaring Scorpion lost with position unknown, the same fate as her World War II namesake. Then came October 28th, run number 75. The photos from that day's search started like all the others. Empty seafloor at 11,100 feet, the occasional deep-sea fish ghostly white in the strobe lights. Frame 2-124 showed something different, a piece of metal, clearly manufactured, with what looked like hull numbers. Frame 2-125 showed more debris. Frame 2-126 made Buchanan's hands shake. It was unmistakably part of a submarine sail. They'd found her. Over the next 3 weeks, Mizar made dozens of passes, each one revealing more of Scorpion's final resting place. The submarine hadn't gone down intact. Her hull was broken into 3 main sections. The bow section, relatively intact but heavily deformed, lay separate from the rest. The operations compartment was completely destroyed, telescoped into itself by the implosion. The engine room had been driven 50 feet forward into the hull, its massive steel structures crumpled like aluminum foil. The debris field told its own story. The propeller shaft had been blown completely out of the hull. Battery plates scattered across hundreds of yards. Personal effects, a shoe, a coffee cup, something that might have been a photograph, lay in the sediment. The sail had been sheared off, lying on its side like a tombstone. But it was what they didn't find that mattered most to investigators. No torpedo damage on the hull, no evidence of collision, no sign of external explosion. Whatever killed Scorpion had come from within. The nuclear reactor compartment remained intact, its shielding undamaged. Radiation readings showed normal background levels. The reactor had shut down properly, its safety systems working even as the rest of the submarine died around it. Captain James Bradley, reviewing the images aboard Mizar, noticed something that would haunt him. The emergency buoy compartment was unopened. They'd never even tried to release a distress signal. Whatever happened had happened too fast for that. The Naval Court of Inquiry convened on June 5, 1968, before they'd even found the wreck. 76 witnesses would testify over 6 months, their words filling 1,400 pages of testimony that ultimately answered nothing. The torpedo theory came first. Investigators knew Scorpion carried Mark 37 torpedoes, temperamental weapons with a history of battery overheating. The scenario was horrifyingly plausible. A hot-running torpedo in the tube, the crew executing emergency procedures to jettison it, the weapon activating its acoustic homing and circling back. It had happened before. USS Tang in 1944, sunk by her own Mark 18. But the evidence didn't fit. The bow section, where the torpedoes were stored, remained largely intact. No scorching, no blast damage radiating outward. Dr. John Craven ran acoustic models comparing Scorpion's death sounds to known torpedo detonations. The frequency signatures didn't match. A torpedo explosion would have produced a sharp spike at 50 hertz. Scorpion's death registered at 446 hertz, the frequency of structural collapse, not explosion. The trash disposal unit emerged as a quieter killer. Work Order 1087, filed but never completed, noted a faulty latch on the TDU valve. At periscope depth, standard procedure: seal the lower valve, open the upper valve, compress air to blow trash into the sea. But if that lower valve failed, if metal fatigue finally won after 8 years of pressure cycles, seawater would fire through a 4-inch pipe at 600 pounds per square inch. At that pressure, the flooding would be unstoppable. Lieutenant Commander Ross Saxon, a submarine engineer, testified about a near-identical failure on USS Chopper. They'd caught it in time, barely. Scorpion, lacking subsafe's emergency seawater shutoff valves, would have had no second chance. Then, on the 50th anniversary in 2018, acoustic expert Bruce Rule published what many considered the smoking gun, the battery explosion theory. Rule had spent decades analyzing Scorpion's acoustic death signature. That first sound at 1820, too weak for a torpedo, too strong for a valve failure, but it matched perfectly with hydrogen explosion models. The batteries, charging while the submarine ran at periscope depth, producing hydrogen gas. The ventilation systems, already compromised by mechanical failures. The submarine at condition Baker, watertight doors sealed. The Navy had changed its battery protocols just 10 months after Scorpion's loss. New regulations specifically forbade entering battery compartments during charging operations. The technical manual revision stated bluntly, "Experience has shown that all individual battery cell explosions have occurred while personnel were working in the battery tank during charge." The recovered evidence supported Rule's theory: battery covers blown off by internal pressure. Battery debris scattered across the wreck site. Burn patterns consistent with hydrogen combustion. The explosion wouldn't have breached the hull. Hydrogen burns fast, but relatively weak. But it would have killed anyone in the compartment, damaged critical systems, started flooding that couldn't be stopped. The timeline made terrible sense. 1820, initial explosion, probably killing 6 to 8 men instantly. The surviving crew, maybe 70 of them still alive, fighting to save their ship. Damage control teams racing through narrow passages, spinning valve wheels, rigging emergency pumps that couldn't match the flooding rate. The boat getting heavier, the down angle increasing. For 22 minutes, they fought. Commander Slattery and his officers in the control room, watching the depth gauge spiral past 700 feet, past 1,000, past the red line at 1,300, the hull groaning, then screaming, rivers of water spraying through failed seals, the lights flickering as seawater reached the electrical panels. At 1842 and 34 seconds, at approximately 1,530 feet, the operations compartment imploded. The collapse took 37 milliseconds, faster than human nervous systems can process pain. The men in that compartment died instantly. Those in the sealed engine room and torpedo room might have had another few seconds as their compartments catastrophically failed in sequence. But the families would never get certainty. In November 2012, they formally requested the investigation be reopened. The Navy refused. The official cause remains unknown. Some secrets, it seems, are meant to stay 11,000 feet down. The memorial stands at Norfolk Naval Station now, black granite polished to a mirror finish, 99 names etched in precise rows. On calm mornings, when the sun angles just right, you can see the harbor reflected in the stone, submarines coming and going where these men never returned. Allie Boogerman remarried eventually, though she kept James's letters in a shoebox on the closet shelf. Her children grew up with a father-shaped absence, learning about him through photographs and service records. His son would join the Navy, too, serving on surface ships. His mother made him promise, never submarines. The Scorpion changed everything and nothing. Within a year, every submarine in the fleet underwent mandatory subsafe certification. The price tag Congress had balked at, $200 million, suddenly seemed reasonable against 99 flag-draped coffins. Emergency blow systems were upgraded. Seawater shutoff valves were repositioned. Battery ventilation procedures were rewritten in language that submarines still call Scorpion rules. But the ocean kept taking boats. The Soviets lost K-129 2 months before Scorpion, 98 men vanishing in the Pacific. The French lost Minerve in January, then Eurydice in March. 4 submarines, 4 nations, 300 men, all in 1968. The year of the submarines, historians would call it, though nobody could explain why the ocean got so hungry that year. Admiral Hyman Rickover, father of the nuclear navy, testified before Congress in 1969. When asked about submarine safety, he said something that never made it into the official transcript, but witnesses remembered. Every submarine is safe until it isn't. The ocean doesn't forgive our arrogance. The families formed a support group that still meets. They share memories, fight for benefits, Demand answers the Navy says it doesn't have. Some believe the battery theory, others insist on Soviet involvement, despite no evidence. A few cling to conspiracy theories about secret weapons tests or CIA operations. The not knowing is its own kind of torment. Barbara Slattery never remarried. She raised their 3 children alone, keeping Frank's office exactly as he'd left it. Navigation charts on the desk, his academy ring in the drawer, a half-finished letter about crew evaluations. She died in 2011, still wearing his wedding ring on a chain around her neck. The wreck itself is monitored. Every few years, the Navy sends down robotic cameras to check the reactor compartment, ensure the shielding remains intact. The images show incremental decay, the hull slowly being claimed by marine growth, the debris field spreading wider with deep currents. In another century, maybe 2, there'll be nothing left but a radiation signature and 99 names in the records. John Walker, the Soviet spy who sold submarine secrets throughout the 1960s, was asked during his debriefing if he knew anything about Scorpion. He claimed the Soviets were as surprised as anyone when she vanished. "They thought we were testing some new stealth technology," he said. "Took them months to believe she was really gone." The last Skipjack-class submarine was decommissioned in 1990. By then, submarine design had moved through 3 more generations. Modern boats have redundant safety systems Scorpion's crew couldn't have imagined. Computer-controlled ballast, automated flooding alarms, emergency breathing systems that can keep a crew alive for days. We learned from their loss, even if we never learned why. Veterans still argue in submarine bars about what really happened. The old-timers who served on skipjacks insist it was mechanical. They all knew boats held together with jury-rigged repairs and prayers. The nuclear engineers blame the battery explosion, pointing to the regulation changes. The conspiracy theorists see shadows of Soviet torpedoes in grainy photographs. But down at 11,000 feet, where sunlight has never reached, where the pressure would crush a human body in a heartbeat, 99 men keep their silence. They're part of the ocean now, their atoms dispersed through the Atlantic's depths, their last thoughts unknowable. The sea, as submariners say, keeps her own. Mike Hannon is in his 80s now, living in a Florida retirement community where the afternoon sun reminds him nothing of that gray Norfolk morning. He still dreams about it sometimes, sitting at the communication station, watching message traffic, knowing Scorpion was gone while families waited in the rain. His friend Joe Cross visits these dreams, still young, still laughing about the restaurant he was going to open. "I should have said something," Hannon told an interviewer in 2018. "Should have called somebody's wife, warned them. But you follow orders. You always follow orders." Every year on May 27th, a ceremony plays out at Norfolk Naval Station. The remaining families gather, fewer each year as time claims the widows, the siblings, the children who've become grandparents themselves. They read the names, all 99 in alphabetical order. It takes 11 minutes, the same time it took for Scorpion's hull to fall from crushed depth to the ocean floor. The youngest man aboard was 19, the oldest 45. They came from 36 states, brought together by duty or economics or the simple desire to be part of something larger than themselves. They left behind 65 widows and 90 children. Those children have had 20,000 days now to wonder what their fathers' voices sounded like. The submarine force learned its lessons written in blood. No U.S. submarine has been lost since Scorpion, the longest safety record in American naval history. Every boat that goes to sea carries her ghost in its procedures, the battery protocols, the emergency systems, the constant reminders that the ocean is patient but unforgiving. In 2019, a retired Navy diver named Tom Detweiler located what he believed was a piece of Scorpion sail using advanced sonar. He wanted to recover it, create a proper memorial. The Navy denied his request. Some things are meant to stay buried, they said. The wreck is a military grave, not to be disturbed. But graves are for the living, not the dead. And the living still ask questions. Why didn't they release the emergency buoy? Could they have surfaced if they'd blown ballast immediately? Did they know, in those final 22 minutes, that they were going to die? Or did they fight until the very end, believing that training and courage could overcome physics? The ocean keeps no logbooks, records no last words. We know only what the machines heard, those 15 acoustic events that mark the transformation of a submarine into a memorial. The rest is speculation dressed as investigation, theory masquerading as truth. Commander Slattery's son became an aerospace engineer. He designed safety systems for spacecraft, machines that operate in an environment even less forgiving than the deep ocean. Every component that can fail will fail, he tells his team. Design accordingly. He keeps his father's photograph on his desk, the formal portrait in dress whites, the one where he almost smiles. The Scorpion's motto was, "Preserve the peace," painted on her sail above those 24 victory flags from successful exercises. She was built for a war that never came, lost to an enemy that might have been nothing more than mental fatigue and human error. Or maybe that's the war, the constant battle against entropy, against the ocean's hunger, against the limitations of steel and flesh. The truth sleeps at 32°55' north, 33°9' west, beneath 1,100 feet of Atlantic darkness. It sleeps with 99 men who ran out of time before they ran out of courage. It sleeps in twisted metal and scattered debris, in battery plates and personal effects, in the silence that followed those final sounds. Some say we owe them answers, but maybe what we owe them is simpler, to remember their names, to learn from their loss, to send our own into the depths with better chances of coming home. The sea is vast and patient and older than memory, and somewhere in its darkness the Scorpion keeps the last watch. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.